There are sentences in American politics that never stop echoing once they are spoken out loud. Richard Nixon had them, Bill Clinton had them, George W. Bush had them. Moments where a single line suddenly revealed more than the speaker intended. Moments where the mask slipped for just a second and the country got an unfiltered look at the real calculation underneath the performance. And now Donald Trump may have delivered one of his own. Stupid Republicans, not Democrats, not the media, not prosecutors, not Joe Biden, Republicans, his Republicans, the voters who defended him through impeachments, indictments, civil trials, criminal convictions surrounding his inner circle, and nearly a decade of non-stop political warfare. Donald Trump looked directly at the people who carried him back into power and called them stupid because they refused to stop asking questions about Jeffrey Epstein. That is the story tonight. Not just the insult itself, but what caused it. Because people do not suddenly turn on their own supporters unless pressure is building somewhere underneath the surface. And what makes this moment politically dangerous for Donald Trump is that the pressure is not coming from CNN, MSNBC, or Democratic leadership. It is coming from inside the MAGA movement itself. This is not another routine Trump controversy where outrage burns hot for 48 hours and disappears beneath the next distraction cycle. This is something much more volatile. This is a fracture between Donald Trump and the one political asset that has always kept him alive: absolute loyalty from his base. And the trigger for that fracture has one name: Jeffrey Epstein. For weeks, the Trump administration tried to smother this story the same way it smothers everything else: flood the zone, change the subject, manufacture outrage somewhere else. Tariffs, Rosie O'Donnell, citizenship threats. Random social media explosions designed to drag cameras away from the central question. But none of it worked because the Epstein story has something most political scandals do not have anymore in modern America: moral gravity. The victims were children. That changes the temperature of the entire conversation. And suddenly even people who spent years defending Donald Trump started demanding transparency. Release the files, release the evidence, explain the missing footage, explain the contradictions, explain why Attorney General Pam Bondi publicly suggested there was more material under review before abruptly shifting into damage control mode. That is when Donald Trump made the single most revealing political mistake of his post-presidency era. He stopped attacking the accusation and started attacking the audience. In a long social media rant, Trump called the Epstein scandal a hoax, blamed Democrats, blamed the media, blamed what he called foolish Republicans, and then escalated further. "These people are stupid people," Trump said while complaining about supporters continuing to focus on Epstein. Think carefully about what that means. Donald Trump is not furious because Democrats are asking questions about Jeffrey Epstein. He expects that. He is furious because his own supporters are asking them too. And underneath all of this sits the question Trump still refuses to answer directly. A reporter asked him one of the simplest yes or no questions imaginable. "Is your name in the files?" Donald Trump did not say no. He kept walking. And that silence may be more politically damaging than any statement Donald Trump could have made, because silence creates a vacuum. And in American politics, vacuums do not stay empty for very long. They get filled with speculation, suspicion, leaked timelines, forensic analysis, and eventually something even more dangerous for a politician than opposition outrage: distrust from his own side. Because this Epstein story is not operating like a normal partisan scandal anymore. Democrats are talking about it? Yes. Cable news is talking about it? Yes. But the real problem for Donald Trump is that conservative media figures, MAGA influencers, former Trump allies, and Republican voters are talking about it too. That changes the equation entirely. Look at the sequence here because the sequence matters. Donald Trump spent years conditioning his supporters to believe that every investigation around him was fake. Russia was a hoax. Impeachment was a hoax. The Steele dossier was a hoax. Federal prosecutors were corrupt. Intelligence agencies were corrupt. Courts were politically infected. The strategy was always the same. Do not answer the underlying question. Delegitimize the people asking it. And for years, that strategy worked brilliantly. But Jeffrey Epstein creates a problem that does not fit neatly into Trump's old political playbook, because this story is attached to documented victims, criminal convictions, sealed investigative material, flight logs, surveillance gaps, and a co-conspirator currently sitting in federal prison. This is not abstract ideology. This is not tax policy. This is not a border speech. This is a convicted sex trafficking network involving underage girls. That changes how ordinary people process the story emotionally. A voter might tolerate spin about tariffs because economics feels distant. A voter might tolerate exaggeration about elections because politics already feels tribal. But when the subject becomes children, exploitation, and hidden evidence, the emotional center of gravity shifts instantly. Suddenly, people are no longer evaluating Donald Trump as a partisan figure. They are evaluating whether powerful people are protecting each other. And that is exactly why Trump's reaction became so revealing. Instead of calming the situation, instead of authorizing maximum transparency, instead of saying, release everything and let the public judge, Trump escalated emotionally. He posted repeatedly about the Epstein Files. He attacked Republicans, demanding answers. He accused them of helping Democrats. He called them weaklings. That is not the behavior of a man confidently moving past a fake story. That is the behavior of a man who understands the story is escaping containment. And then came one of the strangest details in this entire saga. A detail almost too absurd for a Hollywood political thriller script, because if you wrote this in a screenplay, editors would probably tell you to tone it down for realism. According to new forensic analysis reported by Wired magazine, the surveillance footage near Jeffrey Epstein's jail cell may contain not one missing minute, as previously reported, but nearly 3 full missing minutes. 3 minutes missing from what officials publicly described as raw footage from the night Epstein died. Now stop and think about how catastrophic that looks from a public trust perspective. Imagine a local police department investigating a suspicious death in your hometown. Imagine officials telling the public the surveillance footage is complete. Then forensic analysts discover portions missing anyway. Would ordinary Americans simply shrug and move on? Of course not. They would demand answers immediately. And the more aggressively authorities tried to shame people for asking questions, the more suspicious the situation would become. That is the trap Donald Trump has now walked directly into. Because the deeper issue here is no longer Jeffrey Epstein alone. The deeper issue is whether Americans still believe the rules apply equally when wealthy and politically connected people are involved. That is why this story refuses to die, no matter how aggressively Trump tries to dismiss it as a hoax. The word itself is becoming politically self-destructive because Americans have now heard Donald Trump call too many things hoaxes before eventually discovering there was far more underneath the surface than initially admitted. And this is where the moral center of the story becomes unavoidable. The victims, not the headlines, not the political strategies, not the social media warfare, the victims. One of the girls who testified against Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell said she was 14 years old when Epstein first abused her. 14. She testified that she had never even seen a penis before the moment Epstein assaulted her inside the Palm Beach pool house. She described freezing in fear, completely frozen. Think about that image for a second, because this is where the conversation changes from politics into something darker and much more human. A 14-year-old girl standing inside a billionaire's mansion, while some of the most powerful adults in America move through elite social circles around the man abusing her. That is the reality underneath all the slogans and spin. And now imagine being one of those victims watching powerful people on television argue that the public should stop asking questions because the scandal is politically inconvenient. That is why Trump's language hits such a nerve even among his own supporters. Because once children enter the center of a story like this, attempts to shame people into silence stop looking defensive and start looking morally detached. This is where Donald Trump's political instincts may finally be colliding with a subject too radioactive even for modern tribal politics to contain. Because for nearly 10 years, Trump trained supporters to see every attack against him as proof he was dangerous to the establishment. Every indictment became evidence of persecution. Every investigation became evidence of corruption inside the system. Every controversy strengthened the emotional bond between Trump and his base because the movement interpreted survival itself as proof of righteousness. But the Epstein issue breaks that emotional formula in half. Why? Because this story does not revolve around abstract power struggles in Washington. It revolves around whether powerful adults protected a convicted sex trafficker connected to underage girls. That instantly creates a moral hierarchy stronger than party loyalty. And notice something critically important about Trump's response. Donald Trump never actually addressed the core public concern directly. He attacked Democrats, he attacked the media, he attacked foolish Republicans, he attacked the people asking questions. But what he did not do was explain why transparency should be feared if there is truly nothing damaging left to uncover. That absence matters. In law, investigators are trained to pay attention not only to statements, but to evasions. Not only to what is emphasized, but to what is strategically avoided. And Trump's entire communication pattern around Epstein suddenly looks less like confidence and more like containment. Then, the backlash spread somewhere the White House absolutely did not want it spreading, inside conservative circles. Michael Flynn, Trump's own former national security advisor, publicly warned that the Epstein issue was not a hoax and said millions of Americans simply wanted trust, restored between the federal government and the public. Alex Jones practically begged Trump on air to stop attacking his own supporters. That is politically extraordinary. When even longtime loyalists start publicly distancing themselves from your handling of a scandal, the danger is no longer external opposition. The danger becomes internal erosion. And internal erosion is what destroys political movements from the inside out. And that is why this moment matters far beyond Donald Trump himself, because what we are watching now is not simply another scandal cycle. It is a stress test of whether public trust in American institutions can survive when political power, celebrity influence, criminal allegations, and sealed evidence all collide inside the same story at the same time. Because look carefully at where this ends if the public fully stops believing the process. If Americans begin to believe that investigative files disappear whenever powerful people are connected to them, if surveillance footage develops unexplained gaps, if officials declare cases closed while refusing maximum transparency, if politicians attack citizens for asking questions instead of answering them, then eventually people stop trusting not just politicians, but the institutions surrounding them. That is the real danger here. Not Twitter outrage, not cable news panels, not even Donald Trump's political future. The real danger is institutional corrosion. And the irony is brutal, because Donald Trump built his entire political identity around the promise of exposing corruption inside elite systems. He convinced millions of Americans that he alone was willing to confront the protected class in Washington, the media, intelligence agencies, and corporate power structures. That anti-establishment identity became the emotional engine of the MAGA movement. But now many of those same supporters are asking a very simple question. If transparency matters everywhere else, why not here? And Trump's answer so far has not been transparency. It has been anger. That matters, because anger is not evidence. Insults are not explanations. Calling people stupid does not fill missing minutes on surveillance footage. Calling people weaklings does not answer why Epstein's network still feels partially hidden from public view. And calling the scandal a hoax does not erase the testimony of underage victims who described abuse under oath in federal court. This is where the entire story becomes bigger than party politics. A lot of Americans watching this are not asking whether Donald Trump should automatically be declared guilty of something. That is not actually the central issue anymore. The deeper issue is whether powerful people still receive a different level of protection from the system itself. Because ordinary Americans understand something instinctively. If a school teacher, a mechanic, or a local businessman were connected to a convicted sex trafficking network involving minors, investigators would tear through every document, every phone record, every surveillance file, every financial transaction without mercy. No one would tolerate missing footage. No one would tolerate vague explanations. No one would tolerate selective transparency. But when elite names enter the equation, suddenly everyone is told to calm down, move on, stop asking questions, trust the process. That double standard is what is poisoning trust. And Donald Trump may have made the biggest political mistake of this entire saga the moment he turned his frustration toward the very people demanding accountability. Because once supporters begin feeling insulted instead of defended, loyalty starts mutating into suspicion, quietly at first, then all at once. That is how political movements crack, not usually from one dramatic explosion, from accumulated doubt. And tonight that doubt is growing, because the simplest question in this entire scandal still hangs unanswered over the White House like smoke that refuses to clear. If there is truly nothing left to hide, then why does transparency seem to frighten so many powerful people? That question is not going away, and neither is the silence surrounding it. If you believe powerful people should face the same scrutiny as everyone else, hit like. If you think transparency should never depend on political loyalty, leave a comment. Share this video with someone following the Epstein story, and subscribe, because this story is not ending anytime soon.